Welcome to the latest episode of Branding the Experience. We discuss ways how we can create environments where employees actually want to come to work and customers want to keep coming back. I am Ken Bader, your host for Branding the Experience, and our subject today, are PR firms worth it? Now, I'm wearing my podcast magazine t-shirt today. Some of you know that one of my many endeavors is to be a category director for two categories in podcast magazine, true crime, which I covered for about 2.5 years now, and comedy, which I started in late 2021. And in that endeavor, I've had to come across dozens and dozens of PR firms. And also a little bit in my podcasting. I do Branding the Experience. I do Cool Culture Corner. I also do public safety talk radio for my other business, Police Officers Credit Union Association. So I've worked with PR firms on getting guests on those shows, more so for public safety talk radio than Branding the Experience and Cool Culture Corner. Those two particular podcasts, I do for fun. I certainly do take them seriously and try to use it to promote my brand of Bader Training and Consulting. But do that a little bit more of a fun endeavor rather than a real serious type of responsibility that I take public safety talk radio. But in the essence of having some fun here on Branding the Experience, I'm going to have a little bit of fun with PR firms, and I'm going to give a shout out to a couple that I really, really like. But we'll say that it's been my experience since working with Podcast Magazine in late 2019 when we were launching that magazine. It's since working with PR firms in the podcasting space, probably since about 2018, when my podcast started to get a little bit more notoriety. I would say that about 40% of the time, give or take, maybe 50, but about 40% of the time working with a PR firm as an interviewer, either for publication or a podcast, has been a positive experience. So let me rephrase that. About 40% of the time that I've dealt with PR firms has been a positive experience. Maybe because I'm cynical, let's stretch it up to 50-50. So that's like a coin toss as to whether you're going to have a good experience or a bad experience in working with a PR firm. And it leads me to ask myself, are PR firms really worth it for the client itself? Now, I've certainly had opportunities to hire PR firms. I get emails and LinkedIn messages all the time on that for PR firms, sales help, what else? Virtual assistants from all over the country. I don't use any of that. I've thought about using it at times. I certainly could. But the reason that I don't is because I want people to talk to me. I don't want to be unapproachable and say, well, you need to go through my assistant or my PR firm in order to. I just don't want to do it. It's just not my deal. So I want to actually talk to people and not seem like I'm more important than other people. And I do know that there are legitimate reasons to use PR firms. Some people use them successfully to help build their brand, and that makes some sense. So, let me give you a couple of examples of PR firms that I think work really well. And I think that they work really well. And I think this is important to think of if you're using a PR firm to help build your brand, to help get you press, to help get you more notoriety out there, then you need to work with that PR firm or that PR director or assistant, whomever you want to call that individual that you're working with, as anybody else you would on your team. They can't be thought of as a second class citizen, like somebody that you hired and said, hey, you know what? Yeah, I hired you, you go and do it. You need to work with that person as a team. You certainly wouldn't treat an employee or a peer at your business like a second class citizen. If you would, then that's a whole different problem. But you need to be able to give that PR professional support and work with them. If you're not going to work with them, then you're going to make the PR firm look bad and make it so much more difficult to help raise your brand awareness. And I'm going to circle back to that, but I want to give you two examples of two great professional PR firms that have been in that 40%. Firms that I've recently worked with in regards to Podcast Magazine who have been awesome. The first one is Baby Grand PR, Julia Bardzell, Renee Swanberg, and Jason Tolbert. All of them, I might even be missing a name, so I apologize ahead of time. But they were awesome in working with me on CrimeCon and getting me in there in a press pass. And basically, I felt like I was treated like gold, which wasn't necessary, but definitely really appreciated. Plus, they were just fun people. I mean, all you really have to do is be professional. But if you could be fun too, that's, all the better. But they treated me and their clients and everybody else with a lot of respect. And that goes a long way. And with that, they were able to not only help me in CrimeCon, but get, I believe, I covered a lot of podcasts at that particular event, which was a great event. But I know that there's at least one, probably a couple of podcasts that they also have as clients that will be on Podcast Magazine. I know one of them is The Real Killer, which will be in Podcast Magazine in August. Great podcast, by the way, but they did an excellent job of being communicative and making sure that everybody was treated with respect. And I certainly felt special, and they helped me out a lot, which was unusual, frankly, as a interviewer in my experience in dealing with PR firms. One other great example, and this is a good example of how to work with a PR firm. Obviously, you need to have a firm that is going to certainly look after your back and make sure that they're putting your best interests in mind, obviously, because you're paying them. But also, you need somebody that's going to be professional in working with these other entities, whether it be a news station or a podcast or a magazine and so forth. So this is a great example. One of the best examples that I can give you of working with a PR firm. The PR firm is Shark Party Media out of New York, and the owner-founder who I work with is Catherine Musilek, and I apologize ahead of time if I'm getting that name wrong. But just an excellent interaction. Yeah, I'm always a little bit leery of working with a PR firm to begin with, because again, I've had so many negative experiences that when I do get an email from a PR professional saying, hey, can you cover this podcast in Podcast Magazine, or can you get my guest onto a particular podcast that you produce, I'm always going into it a little bit leery. Maybe it's because I'm old and cynical. Who knows? Maybe I need to change that. But she represents Jen Kirkman and her podcast, Anxiety Bites. And I believe the other one is No Fun with Jen Kirkman. Two great podcasts. And Jen Kirkman is actually a very funny comedian, and just a great person. So, having known of Jen Kirkman for a while, I really wanted to interview her and cover those podcasts for Podcast Magazine. So I did answer Catherine's email. And originally, it didn't go so smoothly. I have a particular process of when and where and how I do interviews, and I lay that out ahead of time. And it looked like that wasn't going to jive. But she made it work. She went back to Jen Kirkman and found a way to make that work. And then, even when a wrench got thrown in the works where we had to reschedule, she didn't come back to me as many, many other PR firms do. And this was another situation that spurred this particular session, this particular episode. What Catherine did is she said, you know what? That original time doesn't look like it's going to work. But here are two other times that would work. And here's another alternative if those two particular times won't work, and how to get the interview done. And I really appreciated that, because a lot of PR firms, what they'll do is say, well, this won't work. I've got to cancel and reschedule. Well, all right, help me out. I don't want to start back at zero. Granted, I'm nobody special, just like everybody else. But if I'm having you on my show, or even more so, if I'm going to be covering you for Podcast Magazine, we're doing your firm and your client a little bit of a favor. And that's fine. We're not that special, but, give us a little bit of professional courtesy. Don't just simply say, well, it's not going to work. Give us some more times. I don't want to start back from zero as an interviewer. And frankly, if you have a PR firm that does that, that's going to be, in my estimation, a negative reflection on your personal brand. Because odds are that's already going to be a negative if you do get the interview, or you might just not get that interview. But Catherine didn't do that. She gave me 3 different alternatives, which I thought was really, really professional. And one of them worked. We made it work. The interview went great. Jen Kirkman is an awesome person, and Anxiety Bites and No Fun with Jen Kirkman's going to be covered in the August issue, barring anything unforeseen, of Podcast Magazine. So definitely look for that. 2 great podcasts and a great comedian. But that also brings me to the point that you have to work with your PR firm. Now, it's my assumption that Jen Kirkman probably went to Catherine Musilek and said, you know what, that original time isn't going to work. Can you do something? And Catherine probably says, well, you're on the East Coast, he's on the West Coast. Maybe, can you do this, that, and the other thing? And Jen, being a wise individual and just a good person, probably says, yeah, I could do this, that, and the other thing, see if that'll work. So, there was mutual respect. Everybody worked together. Jen obviously, respected Catherine. Catherine respected my time. And it was just all around a great experience. And it resulted in what I felt was an excellent interview and conversation, and what will be a terrific article for Podcast Magazine. But where the 50 to 60% comes in is, one, when the client doesn't work well with the PR firm, when you hang the PR firm out to dry or in a bad situation. And that's what happened today. I actually had a guest for Branding the Experience that I had expected to interview tomorrow. And we traded a number of emails and to try and get this done. Now, to give you some context, I had interviewed this individual before for a different podcast that I don't even do anymore. The subject matter wasn't really all that exciting, frankly. But the guest is a really good person. I had fun with this individual before, while the subject matter wasn't perfectly aligned with Branding the Experience. But what I believe happened is this particular PR firm's client left them out to dry. That they said, all right, yeah, we can do this podcast on this particular day. And as it was, we worked out sometimes in a long period of, I think, almost over a month before I heard from them went by. And I said, okay, we could get them scheduled on this day, that day, or the other day. And I'm like, great, we'll do it, X day, X time, as you mentioned in your email. And then I get an email today saying, well, we don't know if we could do it. I haven't heard back from the client. By the way, what's the subject matter? And don't put more obstacles in there. Now, I don't blame the PR firm. They were very apologetic. And I do believe that the client hung them out to dry, maybe either on purpose because something else more important came up, at least in their minds, or they just simply didn't do a very good job of communicating with their PR representative. Maybe they do feel that their PR firm is a second-class citizen or not as important of members of their actual employee team. I don't know. I don't know that particular client very well. I only interviewed them once, but now that is going to be a negative brand association for me in that, all right, it was too much trouble. I don't want to deal with this particular organization anymore. Not necessarily the PR firm, but it's an example of when you hire a PR firm and you give them dates and you give them some direction on what you want done, and then you don't follow through or communicate or show up in some cases. I've had that happen. The last example that I'll give in the 50 to 60%, which goes back to, are PR firms worth it? And I think you have to really look long and hard at hiring a PR firm and getting the right one, getting recommendations and so forth. My experience, again, with Baby Grand PR and Shark Party Media have been very, very positive, but many have not. And to give you two examples with Podcast Magazine, one, thought their client and some of the demands that they made were more important than Podcast Magazine in my time. Well, we got through it, but, go figure, none of the other clients for that PR firm has been featured in any of my articles because, I've got plenty of different podcasts to cover, whether it's through PR firms or through particular face-to-face clients, where I don't need to go through a lot of obstacles. If there's an obstacle here, there are 6, 7, 8, 9 other interviews that I can do that will be without obstacles. And so you have to pick the right PR firm because, yes, you need to, as a PR firm, stand up for your client, but you need to make sure that you're not making the client look like frankly, a pain. If you as a PR firm are going to put your client up here and the publications that you're working with to try and get them in, down here, that's going to be a real negative brand association. And I know, while yes, your client is your number one priority, you're going to burn bridges in getting your client the right PR, the right exposure, because you're not treating the interviewers with the right respect. So when you're looking for a PR firm, if that's the road you want to go down, one, get a lot of recommendations, hear what people are saying about that particular PR firm. Two, be very, very clear on the objectives and the strategy that you want the PR firm to carry out. Three, treat that PR firm like a team member, like any other employee, and take their advice and be communicative with them. Don't leave them hanging and say, hey, I'll be available on Thursday to do podcasts. And then when the PR firm schedules one, not communicate with them. very, very bad. And and the last thing is, make sure that you're working with them in a very close relationship. Again, that probably just is a reiteration of the work with them as a team member. But you need to make sure that if you are going to hire a PR firm, that you're going to make sure that that money is not only well worth it, but also isn't wasted because you didn't communicate properly with the firm or you left them out to dry. Thanks for spending some time with me today. And here's hoping, as always, that you're branding the experience at a very high level for all those you serve. Events are back in full swing. I'm actually heading to my 4th conference in at least as many months so far in 2022. I'm overjoyed to be fully back in business after the pandemic, and it would be a privilege to be a part of your next event. Do you need a speaker for your next conference? Maybe a facilitator for your next strategic planning or training session? A full program with expert panelists and interactive exercises for attendees? Or maybe you need an MC for your next event. I'm here to help and have the expertise to be a part of an amazing agenda for your audience. Learn more about Bader Training and Consulting at www.btcinc.net, or better yet, just contact me directly at kbader@btcinc.net, and let's talk about your next event, next training session, or next summit.